Is it impossible? Is it impossible for someone in a position of power to be deceptive and even twisted as to want to harm people? Is that an impossibility? Have we somehow reached a point in human civilization where it's impossible for anyone in a position of power to be corrupted by that power and actually want to harm people for no good reason? Maybe they have some crazy reason in their head, but is that impossible? I don't think it's reasonable to say it's impossible, right? So if it's not impossible, then what safeguards do we have against that? Well, being able to express alternative viewpoints is a safeguard, right? Freedom of speech, right? Is a safeguard against some scenario like that from occurring. So these folks that think they have the authority and the right to label something harmful speech or misinformation, and the only speech that is acceptable is what they're pushing, it assumes that they're basically angelic, and anyone that is opposing them are evil, right? So they're assuming their own perfect morality and intelligence and rationality, and anyone with an opposing view is automatically considered harmful, right? Is considered to be even criminal, right? And so this is just going back to points that I've made in other audios where the underlying thing that's going on is basically a assumption of superiority. People are being given special rights for no good reason whatsoever. I mean, they may have fancy titles, they may be CEO of this company or, governor of this state or president of that country or whatever, but that a title, a position of power doesn't give you automatic moral superiority. But that's what they're assuming by saying we can censor anyone with an opposing view and we can label it harmful. And you can't say what we're doing is harmful. If you say that what we're proposing is harmful, whatever medical mandate, for example, if you're if you're even questioning its perfect safety, then you're a criminal, you're a bad person, you're um, pushing harmful speech, you're pushing misinformation or disinformation, and we have the right to censor you because you're doing a harm to society. Again, how do we know that they're not the ones that are actually harming society with what they're pushing forward, right? So if we don't have an assumption of superiority of people in positions of power, then they have no legitimate right to censor opposing views. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. But I hear pretty much nobody articulating it that way. No one's talking about, well, so there are some people, namely, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people of that mind, of that mindset, of that philosophical orientation. They've they understand that people in positions of power historically have not been trustworthy and they've been very harmful to society, actually. And so maybe we shouldn't give them a monopoly on violence, a right to abuse everyone just because they have these titles and uniforms or whatever, or positions as presidents of big tech companies, right? It's is basically just a perspective of I'm not going to assume they're superior, right? And that's what America is supposed to be about, right? A government of, by, and for the people, right? So if the government is of the people, that means the people and the government are on the same level, right? That means that they don't have special rights that the so-called average person doesn't have, right? Everyone should have the same rights, the same inalienable God-given rights. And the most fundamental right is to not be abused, right? All of the Bill of Rights are basically protections against various forms of abuse. So we can simplify it and say people have the right to not be abused. And one form of abuse is deception. And in order to guard against deception, we need to have a free flow of information. We need to be able to have countering viewpoints, and we need to prevent one group from assuming moral superiority and therefore supposedly have these special rights that they can censor people, but we can't censor them, right? It's just this one way, dictatorial, tyrannical, kind of my way or the highway, where every, state in the union is basically run by a monarch now who can just give executive orders, and that's the rule of the land because they say so, right? Why are they being assumed to be the superior superhuman who's never wrong, never deceptive, could never be part of some crazy agenda? Why is that, why is it assumed that they're just angels upon the earth? It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous, especially when people with immense power tend to be corrupted by that power. So the legitimacy of this censorship is nowhere to be found, but they're just hoping to manipulate folks into going along with it by saying, oh, this is harmful, or this is hate speech, right? Or this is misinformation. And so, we need to protect everybody. So again, it's a preemptive attack. And I've already done multiple audios talking about preemptive attack being society's main blind spot. That's the main tactic they keep using over and over. We can commit aggression against you in the name of safety for something you may hypothetically do, right? It's a totally bunk premise. You can't harm someone because you think they may harm someone, or because you say they're harming someone just by expressing an alternative viewpoint, just because you label something harmful that isn't actually harmful, right? What is harmful? And this is key. This is like core ethics that needs to be understood. What is actually harmful? Because when you recognize and acknowledge that, then if anything is labeled harmful that doesn't fall under the accurate description of harm, then you can discard it, right? So again, it comes down to a simple idea. Abuse is wrong. Abuse is harmful, right? And abuse can be the initiation of violence, otherwise known as aggression. Abuse can be deception. Abuse can be belittlement, right? But no one has the special right to abuse another person. Even if you think someone else is being abusive, you don't have the right to abuse them back, right? Because again, aggression is the initiation of violence. Deception wouldn't be necessary in defending against abuse. And belittlement also wouldn't be necessary. So it's just pure evil that has no place in society whatsoever. So preemptive attack, not legitimate. Censorship based on assumed superiority of whoever's doing the censoring is not legitimate, right? And the slippery slope can be real, right? It starts with, oh, it's just a mask, and now it's, oh, it's just a vaccine passport, right? And many people, including myself, said, hey, this is what I'm concerned about. You think it's just a mask now, but they might try and transition this to a vaccine. And I had many people tell me, no, they would never do that. No, that's never going to happen. And now it's happening. And they're like shrugging their shoulders, like, well, I guess if it's what we need to do, they're just going along again with whatever medical tyranny comes down the line. But there is this progression that happens, and historically you can see this is a pattern of abuse. They initiate a small to moderate amount of abuse, and then if that's accepted, they then escalate it. You give them an inch, they take a mile, right? You're letting them put the wedge in the door. So be very wary of laws against so-called hate speech or laws against harmful misinformation, because guess where that can go to? It can go to where it's full on communist style, like in China and North Korea, where I believe, any speech against the government is considered hate speech or misinformation, right? So they control the population even further by criminalizing dissent. And so it might start in a way that seems not so bad. Oh, well, it's just against racism. Or they're just trying to protect people from getting bad medical information, right? But you're assuming that the people that are putting down those laws don't have any bad agenda of their own. You're assuming that cultural Marxism doesn't exist and they don't use oppressed populations as a vehicle to increase state power, even and when they don't actually even care about those people. They're just using them as a vehicle, like I said, to pass these laws supposedly to support these oppressed people, but it's really just it's just a way to increase state power by infringing on your freedoms further, by taking away your right to free speech. So I'll end this talk here. I hope that again you'll consider and talk with others about these key ideas that preemptive attack is not legitimate. Censorship assumes the superiority of those doing the censoring, and that they do, in fact, increase their level of abuse when you accept their initial stage of it. The idea that you can be restricted from traveling now if you don't accept some pharmaceutical cocktail being injected into you and your children is just insane. It assumes that the people making it are completely angelic and they've made no mistakes, and that it's going to be perfect for you as an individual and your daughter and son as individuals with their particular bodies and everything. Like, oh, it's perfect for everybody, it's safe for everybody. And on top of that, it's assuming that it's impossible that there could be some folks at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, that actually have a harmful intent, that actually are pushing something that isn't safe. Assume the superiority of a huge industry like the pharmaceutical industry, which has actually a terrible track record, is ridiculous, as is assuming the superiority of government officials. Where is the where's the evidence for that? It's nowhere to be found, right? Historically speaking, we see just the opposite. Or, just because someone's the president of some big corporation, like, since when are, CEOs of giant corporations known as like the most virtuous people on the planet? I'm not saying they're all evil. I'm just saying to assume that they're superior is totally irrational. It's an assumption of superiority. So censorship equals assumption of superiority of the people doing the censoring. I hope that that idea can be shared, but it's getting to the point where what I'm saying right now can be labeled misinformation, right? So they're just censoring dissent, right? Saying what I'm saying is hate speech or harmful. But meanwhile, who's to say they're not the ones that are really doing the harmful thing? And one more thing, just on the hate speech, and people talking about like, hate-free zone, or no more hate. It's actually good to hate evil. Like hate isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends what you're hating, right? So to say all hate speech is bad is ridiculous. No, if you're speaking against evil that you hate, that's good, right? So it's just, again, just an example of this false morality that's going on, where what is truly wrong, namely abuse, is not being recognized. And then, these cultural Marxist techniques are being utilized to emotionally manipulate and guilt trip folks into going along with their program. So I hope you will speak out against censorship and not assume that people doing the censoring are superior to you or anyone else that's giving an alternative perspective. All right, thank you for listening.